Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on Spotify, YouTube, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And visit patreon.com/VMSPod or paypal.me/VMSPod to make a one-time or recurring donation and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. Well, let's just dive into this week. Our guest this time around is the great humorist Merrill Markoe, who's returning to the show to talk about her new book, We Saw Scenery. But before we get to that conversation, I've got a special lead-in for you. See, New Yorker cartoonist and past podcast Emily Flake just launched a Kickstarter called St. Nell's Humor Writing Residency for Ladies. And as I post this episode, it has about 10 days left and $10,000 to raise. So the residency is a great idea, and I wanted to talk to Emily about it so we could give it a signal boost and help get this Kickstarter over the finish line. Tell me about the residency. Tell me what's behind it, what it is, and also the fact that you're currently 69% funded, which I just find inherently funny.
Oh, it's absolutely inherently funny. I mean, I would say we should just hang out in that funny spot for a second. Yeah. But honestly, I would, as much as I do appreciate a filthy joke, I would like us to move to 100 and perhaps beyond. Cool. So yes, the residency is a humor writing residency for women, for female identified people, basically like anybody who's not a dude. And yeah, so we basically what we want to do is start this residency just for the same reason everybody else has a residency is just to give creators like some time and space to work on their projects. And I think that it's especially important, I think, for, well, first of all, I don't really feel like there are too many specifically humor oriented residencies. So that felt like a niche we could fill, not to back into more filthy jokes. And, doing it for women, also it's just like, not to paint with a broad brush, but the constraints and demands on our time are legion.
Sure.
I mean, that goes, especially during pandemic times, that goes for men and women, but a little bit goes double for women. So sure. Just like a house where you can go and you're not in charge of anything except for like sitting your butt down and working just seems like kind of a dream. Honestly, I basically made this residency because I want to do this residency.
That's one of my questions. Is this something you wish you had when you were, coming up or trying to find the time to write?
Oh, 100%. And there are residencies. I have done residencies over the years, and it is never not incredibly helpful. I've done ones where I went to by myself before I had a kid. I have done ones where I was allowed to bring my family, which was great. We are going to run at least one per year where the creator can bring their family, which, I mean, honestly made a big difference. Even though you still have like somebody to look after, it's sort of understood that, you are allowed to claim more time just because this is what you're there for. Yeah. And yeah, just again, being able to get out of your own space and enter a space that is dedicated for your work, I think is really key. I mean, there's a reason that most people, even if they work from home, like to go to a coffee shop, just someplace that it's like, now I am in my work headspace.
Hmm. And where'd you get the idea for it? Did it predate the pandemic, or is this something that's really come about during this whole situation?
I think basically, especially if you live in New York, you have one of two fantasies, or maybe you have both. And fantasy number one is to move upstate and raise goats. And fantasy number two is to start an artist residency. So, I am not great at animal husbandry. So my fantasy has always been like to start some kind of residency. Um, and we spent a lot of time this summer in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and it occurred to me like this would be a really great place to do that. It's affordable. It's further from New York than a lot of places upstate, but it's still like, it's a reasonable drive. It's also pretty close to other cities. It's like a cool, beautiful, like walkable city. And yeah, everything seemed to kind of snap into place. Like this would be a really great place to actually do this instead of just fantasizing about it.
Can you talk about some of the female humor writers who are, either inspirations for you for this or ones who are actually supporting, keeping in mind that this, our conversation is going to lead into my conversation with Merrill Markoe about her new book this week.
Yeah. So there's a number of, and there's actually some men too, supporting us in terms of like giving like things that we can give away as tiers. Ophira Eisenberg is offering to record 1 minute of sick burns. Karen Chi will write you a page of compliments. Caitlin Kunkel, who started the Satire and Humor Festival, is offering a class. I mean, we've got sort of like a pretty impressive slate, not to toot my own horn, but there's like a lot of awesome things on offer in terms of backer rewards. And pretty much everybody that I've told about this has been like, oh my God, that's a great idea. I want to do it. And people are being very supportive, both monetarily and just in like spreading the word as much as they can. And when I reached out to Merrill Markoe, she was like, yeah, sure. I will absolutely, big mouth this, on the social media, which is fantastic because obviously she is a legend and it can only enhance our profile for somebody that awesome to like make a vocal show of support.
And it's been about 6 months since we connected for the COVID check-in.
Uh-huh.
Holding up okay?
I mean, yeah. Yeah, I mean,
did you create this project to take your mind off of other stuff that's driving you into the ground, or
yeah, it was either that or take up knitting again, I guess. Yeah, it's I mean, again, knock wood. The rent is paid, the lights are on. There's been some, it hasn't been like my most stellar year financially, but I don't think that's been anybody's stellar year. Actually, it's been a few people's stellar year. Some people are making money off this pandemic.
I'm a lobbyist for the pharmaceutical industry. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Right. So yeah, things that were new and weird in the beginning are now just old and weird. I really hope this is not the forever normal. But that being said, the burden that we are carrying now just feels like, all right, well, we've had this for a while. So we may as well just, put our noses to the grindstone and get through it as best we can.
Yeah. And the gag panels could move away from toilet paper and hand sanitizer jokes that we all went through in the early days.
That was ages ago when we were worried about toilet paper. Now, I mean, I guess until the election, when so far after, it's the main thing I find hard to clear space for. I mean, like basically, I feel like it occupies almost my entire headspace is the election and whatever inevitable fallout from the election there is. So we'll see how that goes. I feel like this entire year has been an exercise in like making humor happen in the face of like multiple apocalypses.
Yeah. And I'm always amazed by the stuff you're able to make and that your peers are, that you can find that, that you're not like me waking up. Well, you are like me waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, freak the hell out, but at least you're able to find some humor afterwards.
Right. Here's hoping.
Last question.
I really honestly hope I did not just jinx 2020 to be like, oh, I'm sorry, you need something you can't laugh at.
Come on, giant asteroid. That's what we're all hoping for at this point. Right. But final question, though. The name of the residency is St. Nell's Humor Writing Residency for Ladies. Yes. Tell us about Nell.
So Nell Gwynn was an actress and basically like a comedic actress and like noted funny lady during Restoration England. She was a mistress of King Charles II. My favorite, possibly apocryphal, but I choose to believe it, story about her is, she was riding her carriage on her way to the castle, and people were like throwing stuff and jeering, and somebody called her a Catholic whore. And she stuck her head out the window and she said, "My dear sir, you are mistaken. I am the Protestant whore." And yeah, I appreciate that on many different levels.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. I made my contribution at the beginning, but yes, do you have stretch goals, by the way? Because I'm thinking you're going to pass the initial $50,000 goal to cover the mortgage and insurance and taxes. Do you have other stuff for people if you end up doing? The only other Kickstarter I've done this for was Tom Tomorrow, who ended up like doubling his nice. Ridiculously big Kickstarter. Any events planned on the off chance we're actually able to ever meet in person, or other stuff tied to this?
Oh yeah. I mean, basically the more money we get, the more the more programming we can do, the cooler we can make this. So, if we somehow get like super mega funded, we don't plan to charge for right now. The model that we're looking at is not charging for the residency, but charging for applications to help cover expenses. But if there was a way that like we could offer stipends every now and again, that would be awesome. Doing like, I don't know if you'd call them colloquia, some sort of gathering, bigger in-person classes, some kind of, basically anything where we could fly somebody out maybe to run an in-person workshop. More money is never a problem. So sure, yes, we have our goal that will make it possible, and anything above that would be like very enhancing.
Awesome. Let's hope we get to 169% just so we can keep the humor too.
Exactly.
Cool, Emily. Thanks so much. And, again, I'll signal boost this any way I can.
Thank you so much.
You can find out more about the residency at Kickstarter by searching for St. Nell's or by going to emilyflake.com and following the link from there. I'll also have a link to it in the show notes for this one. The Kickstarter, remember, ends on October 30th, 2020, so go kick in some money now and make St. Nell's Humor Writing Residency for Ladies happen. Also, off mic, I mentioned to Emily that I'll be recording with Martin Amis for next week's episode, and that his new novel is partly about the death of his best friend, Christopher Hitchens. And Hitchens once wrote one of those "women aren't funny" articles. Emily laughed and said she planned on having every toilet bowl in the St. Nell's house inscribed with that phrase. Now, also speaking of funny, our main guest for this episode is the amazing humor writer Merrill Markoe. Merrill and I recorded in person in 2015 during my first and very bizarre trip to L.A. She has a brand new book out now called We Saw Scenery, the early diaries of Merrill Markoe from Algonquin Press of Chapel Hill, and it's amazing. See, in We Saw Scenery, Merrill illustrates her childhood diaries from the 50s and 60s and brings her contemporary self in to narrate it all in some hope of making sense of that life, I guess. Her artwork is fantastic. It's primarily colored pencils, and Merrill went to art school. It's one of those things I sort of forget because she's such a great comedy writer that she's also a good illustrator and artist. So that ties into how We Saw Scenery all comes together. She dramatizes the diary entries while also bringing this sort of coherent narrative above it all. There's a little heaviness, not heaviness, but there's crushes on boys, including an anti-Semite, which we get into in this conversation, fights with her family and her mother's irrational behavior, the sexism and marriage grooming of Girl Scouts and home ec classes. But she shows how all of that gets filtered through a lens that tells you if you can't laugh, you're doomed. And it shows where the roots of a great comedy writer really come from. Now, contemporary Merrill, I hate to use adult when referring to her, is represented as the narrative text sort of above the diary entries, but she also makes occasional presences in the illustrations themselves. And sometimes there are these asides where she's talking to her hippocampus. Anyway, it's all a device that really brings home the whole notion of how we try to understand who we once were and how we want to sort of forgive our past selves and let them know that things worked out okay. Anyway, I'm making it sound less funny than it is. We Saw Scenery is hysterically funny, and it's beautifully drawn, and it's not just a great piece of memoir, but also a really wonderful time capsule for an era that is mercifully behind us. Now, here's Merrill's bio from We Saw Scenery. Merrill Markoe was the head writer for the original The David Letterman Show, the live NBC morning show that was recognized with a Daytime Emmy Award, and the co-creator and first head writer of NBC's groundbreaking Late Night with David Letterman, for which she won 3 additional Emmy Awards. She engineered the majority of the show's original concepts and created the segments Stupid Pet Tricks, Stupid Human Tricks, and Viewer Mail. Markoe also won a Writers Guild Award for her writing and performing work on HBO's Not Necessarily the News. She has written for television shows such as Sex and the City, Newhart, and Moonlighting, and has written for many periodicals, including Rolling Stone, Time, US Weekly, People, Esquire, The New York Times, and The Los Angeles Times, and has cartoon work appearing in The New Yorker. She was recently awarded the Patty Chayefsky Laurel Award for Television Writing Achievement. And now, the 2020 Virtual Memories Conversation with Merrill Markoe. How much of a perspective did this whole process give you of making We Saw Scenery and reading the diaries and kind of bringing it all together into the shape of this book?
How much of a perspective about what?
Yourself, the changes and the constants in who you were and who you could have been versus what you became.
I think I turned into what I was always inexorably going to turn into. I don't think there was any evidence that I could have been something else. I wasn't myself until I was about, I'd say, 14. So there's that. What you find when you look at your old writings, and I recorded every single thing I did when I was a kid, is at least I was a whole different person until I was about 13 or 14. I guess you were just an amoeba that is going off the orders of your parents or whatever. I turned into a really rebellious person by the time I was about 15 or 16. And that person is not so different than I am right now. That's a lot of stuff in common. I mean, way less growth between that period and the period of 10 to 14 in terms of being an articulated human.
Because you talk sort of at the outset as to whether the diaries are going to contain those sort of early versions of who you became. And
they totally do. I mean, I was playing the comedy card early. But everybody I know who is compulsively funny for a living, it comes to you young. You just figure out that you're getting reactions and you just start going back to it over and over. It's my opinion that, if you are a person who starts getting rewarded for looks at that age, you do the same thing, only that way.
Hmm. And where'd the idea come for illustrating?
Well, I went to 6 years of art school. So, so I knew I could do that. And it occurred to me at one point, I have a lot of friends who are cartoonists, and I was looking at them doing graphic novels and thinking, oh my God, I could never have that kind of patience. I would never be able to just sit there and do that anymore. Whereas when I used to be a painter, I used to work on one painting for 8 weeks. You know, I used to just sit there and do it. And I was a way different kind of calmer at that point than I have been since I was a writer. Writing makes you way more jittery, I think. But I had this idea that maybe it would be fun to do a comic strip. And when I sat down and read the diaries, I thought, well, this would be funny. It would be a comic strip written by an 11-year-old girl in another era. And I would just illustrate it without judgment, just to see what it looked like, what she was talking about. So I started doing that, and I started having so much fun doing that I started doing it more and more and more. And I had a big pile of them. And then I started showing it to friends, and friends started going, well, you know, this is a book. And I would say, how is it a book? It's random. And then they all felt it was a book. So I started, once I sold it to somebody, my publisher, then I started having to really figure out how it was a book, because I didn't want it to just be, and then I did this, and then I did that. And you know what else I did? And then I did this. I wanted it to have some other bigger, more universal meaning. So I struggled with that for a couple of years until I figured out where that was going.
Did you run into the problem when I recorded with Roz Chast the first time a few years ago, when she was doing her memoir about her parents aging and dying? She admitted that one of the weirdest breakthroughs she had was that it could be in chapters, because she just didn't understand for the first, stretch that you can break the story up. And you do that in this piece really well.
Well, that part, see, that's where she and I are so different. She's used to working one-off on a cartoon. And since I went to art school, I spent all the rest of the time writing either scripts or books. And I knew all about chapters. I just didn't know exactly how you work drawings into it. So that was a different thing for me. And by the way, she was an inspiration to me. I looked at that book she did about her parents, and I went, well, if I'm going to do something, I want it to be like this. That was such a good book.
Oh, God, that knocked me the hell out. It's amazing. Yeah, who were your other sort of cartooning influences? Because there are moments you remind me of, like Diane Newman or Carol Moisevich, but
I don't even know who those people are. I'm going to want to go look them up now. Send me their.
I'll send you links after this. Sure.
Yeah. No, I mean, I admire anybody with amazing ability to draw. As far as content goes, I mean, I would certainly admire those people with the amazing ability to draw more than I even would for content. But for content, the inspirations were someplace in between Roz Chast and Linda Barry and Mimi Pond. It was all this kind of very literate look at yourself and the past and life that I relate to outside the drawing. So It was that content that was driving me to write the book. The drawing, as it turns out, I was just talking to an artist friend of mine this morning who said to me, I admire that you were able to find a style. And I said, I didn't even find one. It turns out it's like handwriting for me. Yeah. I have a drawing style. I wasn't sure that I did, but when I got a publishing deadline and I had 4 million drawings to do, it turned out, well, yep, I do have a drawing style. And it's this, it would be almost as much trouble to redo that as it would be to redo your handwriting. You can do it, but you'd have to stop every single time you wrote your name and go, okay, don't just write. We're doing it a whole other way. Don't forget, Yeah. So that was interesting to me that my handwriting and my drawing style are kind of locked in the same drawer.
Mm-hmm. As you were working on the book, did you find you were getting more proficient artistically with what you were doing?
Well, yeah. What happened was the first half of the book, the part I sold to the publisher, here's how I was doing it. I was really accommodating. Well, I was used to drawing with pencils and pens and stuff, old style. And I really loved that. And then I learned how to do Photoshop. So I was doing the drawings with pencils and pens, putting it into Photoshop, coloring it in Photoshop, printing it out, and then going back with a pen and playing with it more on the paper. And I did that for the first half of the book. And the second half, Andy, actually, with whom I live, said, you really should try digital. And I said, no, I'm not into that. I really like the pens and the paper and stuff. And then I started playing around with it, and I realized it had an undo button. And whoever came up with the undo button really seriously should have gotten a Nobel Peace Prize. That is the single greatest thing. The idea that you don't have to start over with another piece of paper, but you just go to the spot where you screwed up, and you just go, oh, didn't screw up after all. Right back through it. It's the greatest thing. It's just, if you could only do that with your life, imagine, it's the greatest thing.
The premise for another story, I guess. You mentioned, though, when you started, you were, we'll say, simply drawing the diaries themselves. But in the book, contemporary Merrill is a commentator and sort of in-person advisor periodically. When did the idea come to intrude on yourself?
Well,
like
that came exactly at the moment where I found the entry, which was an early entry. It was me at age 11, I think, where I was deeply in love with a Nazi. And I didn't really realize. I remembered being in love with this guy, and I remembered that there was a thing that was going on between he and I. But somehow, the kid I was in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade didn't think that when I walked in and he did the Nazi salute at me, that was Jew baiting. I thought it was. I thought it was him paying attention to me, and I didn't really add 2 and 2 up. I don't think I must have told my parents. I would think they would have pointed out that it was pretty evil, but it never occurred to me. And I just went ahead and continued to be in love with him. And by love, I mean, I thought he was cute. I didn't know one other thing about him, nor did I ever have a conversation with him or any actual connection to him. He was just around and in my class, and I thought he was cute. And that was when I read that stuff, I just started analyzing it and thinking, well, I know I wasn't a dumb kid. I always got really good grades. What was happening here? And so I thought, well, I need to step into this and have a talk with myself. And so I realized pretty quickly once I started drawing myself into frames with myself that every version of the old version of myself would go, you don't know. What do you know? Like, you know everything? There was no way I was going to be able to have any impact on her, no matter what age she was, because that's who I was. And I still am kind of like that, although I try to curb it.
Yeah, and stay away from neo-Nazis. But
yeah. Well, though I do have a terrible crush on Richard Spencer. He, that's that's a bad joke. I couldn't hate those people more. So,
I got into it with Stephen Heller last year because he had a book about the swastika and design of hate, and we got into the punching a Nazi thing. And he was like, well, I just don't agree with it because, it could always go too far and you could end up punching non-Nazis. I'm like, yeah, but on average, you're going to hit enough Nazis that I think it's still worthwhile.
Well,
we
that's
disagree.
The same argument that everybody has all the time that I know about whether Democrats should take up Trumpian tactics in order to fight back. And, they kind of have to. When you're in a ring with a bully and he's doing one thing and you totally ignore it and just continue your other thing, you have to really depend on people being
decent.
Smart and decent to be appreciating you, Yeah, it's a really weird area.
Yeah. So outside of the neo-Nazi thing, though, were there legit laughs that you had over the course of reading the diaries? Were there things you just busted a gut that your younger self wrote? Well, either intentionally or unintentionally, I guess.
Well, it was all unintentional. The whole thing, the younger self, the whole thing was that my mother gave me a diary for my birthday, I think it was, and I didn't know what you were supposed to do with it. Somebody has to explain it to you. And as I understood it, you were supposed to write down every single thing you did. So that is what I did, basically. And then when I would forget to write for a couple of days, I would go back, and that's where I have pages which I put in. They're using it for end papers in the book. Nothing happened today, as usual. What else happened? Nothing. I would go back and fill the pages in because I felt ashamed that I hadn't written anything on those pages. Forgot what happened today. Forgot what happened today, too. But the rest of the pages are all full of the kind of thing that no adult writes in a diary, like what I watched on TV and what the plot was and what movies I saw and who I went with and what we had for dinner and what test I took at school. I was just really keeping a record. So when I was reading it, I was thinking, well, that's why I was thinking of doing it as a comic strip, because I was thinking, well, this is disarming in a way, and also nothing that any adult would do, because it's too random and it's too detailed and it's too boring, really. And so that, anyway, I was very amused at that. I was also amused that I was in love with a Nazi. That made me laugh. I just was thinking, oh my God, I'll never get over that. But
did it dredge up more ambiguity about your parents and your relationship to them, or is that all stuff that you've safely ensconced in the past?
No, I knew about that stuff. I was looking to see when it started, because I know it never ended, and they're both, deceased, and it lasted for the duration of their lives. So I was pretty aware of it. Yeah. I just had one of those extremely angry mothers who really was not self-analytical, and so she didn't really feel it was her job to find out why she was angry. She felt she was angry about that shirt you're wearing, look where you put a cup. Well, how can I not be angry? That kind of thing. So I was interested to see where it started, and it started someplace specifically when I started differentiating myself from her. When I was basically just a puppet of hers, we got along better, or else I wasn't recording what the problems were. And then as soon as I started having my own boundaries, that was a problem.
Do you ever feel like not that you reconciled with her, but that you reconciled that stuff internally?
Oh, yeah. No, I totally did. I'm sorry that I couldn't get her to analyze herself a little bit and tell me what was cooking in there. But I was seeing a shrink there at the end of her life, and I do almost one-act play rehearsals with the shrink at that point before I'd see my mother. I'd go, okay, I'm going to see her tomorrow, and here's what she's going to say. She's going to say, and then I'm going to say, and then she's going to say. So I was running the whole thing and having a discussion, and then I would go in to see her, and it would pretty much run the way that we thought it had run. You couldn't avoid a fight with her. What you could do, which the shrink taught me to do, is disengage. Just go, okay, Mama, we can talk again when later, and you can do that.
And you were able to recognize enough patterns that you wouldn't repeat in terms of not becoming like your mom.
Yeah. I worked really hard not to be her. She raised me. I was imitating her. Every kid imitates the same-sex parent, more or less. I ended up imitating my dad. So I'm, because she was so out of control that it didn't seem like a smart thing to do to be imitating her. But I started out imitating her, getting in fights with her all the time and getting in fights with other people. I thought you had to be angry all the time. And I gave all that up pretty early and just started doing
I thought you were going to say at 50.
I gave it up and I started doing what my dad did, just kind of smiling and nodding. And, usually that's what a couple does, unless they're, the kind of couple that's going to kill each other. Yeah. That one of them is smiles and nods and the other one vents. It's good cop, bad cop, I guess.
Well, when we were growing up, we had this one couple that was part of my parents' social circle where they split once the kids went to college. And in retrospect, we looked back and realized all the parties they hosted and everything else, we never saw them address each other directly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was always each of them faced out towards other people. But then we realized, Pete's parents never actually talked to each other. And we assume it was like that when, nobody was around too. But
Pete was, seeing the whole other thing, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Did you ever ask Pete? Are you still friends with Pete?
No, I do live in the town I grew up in the house I grew up in, which always freaks people out. I know, it freaks everybody out, but I'm 25 miles from New York. It's close enough. I'm out in the woods. I get to
that sounds pretty.
Oh, it's great, except for the bear who occasionally wander through the yard. But,
But I would like that. I would like to see a bear occasionally.
I will send you a picture of one from right after Labor Day when a neighbor left his trash out an extra day.
Yeah.
And Yeah, 6:15 in the morning, I heard a crash outside. I'm like, I don't even have to look. But I looked. Bear was tipping over the trash can, dragging all the bags into my yard so he could start eating. I thought, okay, he's got to have a buffet.
If you're not out there and in danger, it's kind of sweet to see a bear.
Well, I accidentally went out at one point. I thought he had left, and I went out for my little saunter around the yard and then looked over and realized about 30 feet away he was coming back out to eat the trash. And I looked and thought, he's looking at me. He's looking back down at the trash. I'm some skinny Jew from New Jersey. I'm no threat. So, he didn't come after me or anything.
They tell you to make yourself really tall and wave your arms around and pretend you're powerful if you see a bear. Or that's what I was reading bear stuff recently.
Well, that might be it, because I have pandemic hair. I haven't had a haircut since January, so it's really big, and that may have been enough to cow him and keep him on the other side of the yard. So, I'm hoping that's what it was. But anyway, one of the questions I sort of have that relate to the family question, and is something you and I share. Neither of us have kids. You purport never to have thought of having kids. I also haven't. For some people, it's a way of working out their own fucked up upbringings and childhoods. For the rest of us, it's I guess we got to figure it out for ourselves. Had there ever been a temptation about family, or were you pretty much set
No,
from
I was
the beginning?
that's where my mother had a big influence on me. She didn't look like she liked it. She looked like she was having a miserable time, and that kids are a thing you bring in and then you cope with them, and they are an unpleasant aspect that you just have no choice but to figure out how to deal with. And that's what she and my father both seemed like, that my brother and I were just an irritating burden that they had no choice but to deal with. And so I never thought it looked like a good thing to do. I didn't really know anybody enjoyed having kids until I was pretty old. I just assumed everybody was just coping. They had them for whatever reason because they wanted to see little replicas of themselves. And then they were just coping.
Gotcha. Yeah, my wife and I were we didn't like kids when we were kids. Why would we want to have our own? So I think we're in somewhat similar straits. So.
Well, I actually like them okay but I just never thought that I wanted to be the person. I also never really liked my genetics all that well, so I didn't really want to inflict them on somebody. My brother had kids, so I've got the nephews, and that seems like enough kids.
Yeah, we're the crazy aunt and uncle, and that works fine for us too. So, did you keep diaries, continually from college onwards, or did they kind of peter out after the period?
I kept them till I started doing this book, and then I was too exhausted I was keeping them until I started doing the book. I really haven't been doing anything, but before that, I started keeping a drawing diary, an idea that I got off of looking at Linda Barry's class that she teaches in Wisconsin at the University of Wisconsin, for which she got that MacArthur Genius Grant. And she had them do an exercise where you just do a drawing of what happened during the day. And I realized that was such a better way to keep a diary, because any drawing that I did of a conversation between me and the cashier at Trader Joe's or anybody is way more entertaining and brings back much more detail than the way that I was keeping them, like at various points where it was just a comfort system and a vent, kind of like, I'll never, what that guy said to me, and then I had a lot of those, and they're no fun to read at all. The drawings are way more entertaining to revisit, and they bring back the whole day. You go, oh yeah, that was a day. So that if I started up again, I have 5 years of that, of those that were the last 5 years, and then 3 or 4 years of nothing. But before that, all the way steadily from fourth grade to present.
Wow. And is there a point at which a diary becomes a journal? I don't know if one of them implies like serial killer or anything like that, because I do a daily one, and I'm unpretentious enough to still call it a diary, even though it's just a little notepad that I fill a page or two in every morning.
Well, I think it is a diary. I've thought about that a little bit, and I think they use the word diary to mean girl, and they use the word journal. It's more manly. It has something
like dolls and action figures. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly like that, I think. And then also the thing that is funny about diaries, where this all started, is because the earliest diaries, which were the ones that my mother bought me for holidays or whatever, have a lock and a key, which was a style from the early 60s, based on what, I'm not sure, but I mean, the idea that a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old is writing something that you need to keep under lock and key started to really amuse me. Like, what? That's what my first thought. What was I writing that I was so worried about having the key to, and you read it and it's, nothing happened today. Nothing happened today again, too. Good thing I was able to keep that from prying eyes.
Yeah, but having a brother, at least the way you portray him in the book,
Yeah, well, he would have read that kind of unbelievable detail about how I did nothing all day. That would have been, oh my God, what could have happened then? I did write about the boys I was in love with, so I guess, but my brother could have really cared about that. He was not interested in that. He was playing with soldiers and stuff. He was interested in tormenting me, but he was not certainly interested in my personal life.
Sure. Now, are there aspects of either those pages or, more recent ones where it just doesn't seem like Merrill? I ask because I look at entries from like 2 weeks ago and I can't figure out, did I write this? And I know this last year has been particularly weird, but,
Well, the early kid stuff isn't Merrill. It's pre-Merrill. It's, you know about your frontal lobe and all that?
Yeah.
That you don't get that till you're 28.
I love that image, but yeah, go.
Well, you have a frontal lobe, obviously, but it's not fully connected. And so you have no sense of consequences or interconnectedness of events or stuff. Your brain really stops cooking when you're in your late 20s. So I just assume that every person is an insane version of themselves, more or less, before then. But I was a cognizant, similar version of myself when I was a teenager, just way more naive, way more emotional, and also I really didn't like living in my parents' house. So there was a lot of stuff to butt up against where you couldn't really have control of your life. So I really wouldn't want to go back to any of that. But when I was a kid, that kid just, that kid is a whole other person. Before we moved to California, we were living in Florida for a bunch of years, and the kid who was living in Florida is such a different version of me. I can't even imagine it. I feel like moving to California saved my life, because the kid I was in Florida was all hanging out with a group of kids who were extremely status driven, and I was in like a secret sorority, and the stuff is really funny, but I would never be that person now. So that stuff, that's a whole other version. And I kind of like that as far as the book went, because it was, who are you exactly? And then there was all the stuff I didn't really realize too. Like all the things that my mother wanted for me, I was going ahead with, obviously, when I was a kid. So I was in Girl Scouts and stuff like that. And I had forgotten completely that my Girl Scout troop, all we ever did was kind of things having to do with domestic life, being a housewife and stuff. We were learning how to cook eggs, and we were cutting out recipes and making recipe books. And it was kind of like home ec. It had nothing to do with scouting. I would think the woman who invented Girl Scouts would have been horrified.
It is pretty awesome that all that indoctrination completely failed with you, Well,
I actually am a pretty good cook. I do know how to cook, but yeah, I didn't like it at all. I still think it was a stupid waste of time to get a bunch of girls together and teach them to make a recipe book. You could figure that out some other way.
Yeah, but I guess it's that whole sense of giving them a leg up on domesticity and housewifery. But
yeah, well, when I was in eighth grade, they were calling it junior high. It wasn't middle school yet, and they were making every girl take home ec. And my home ec class was also really pathetic, but it was truly an indoctrination system. We didn't really learn to do anything much. We learned how to use washing machines and how to make fruit cocktail by opening a can of fruit cocktail. It
adds color to the table.
Yes, that is what they said, because I wrote it down, and it was it's just sort of insane. If you're going to, the whole idea of home ec must have come from sort of the farming version, the agrarian version of the United States, and I don't think it was I don't know. It might as well have been put together by Westinghouse or something, that class.
I figure there's probably some eugenics tie-in the same way they made us do square dancing back in phys ed and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
I had square dancing. Yeah, we had square dancing. Why was that? Was, I guess, the agrarian America was in charge of the school system for a while. I'm betting they could do square dancing now.
Yeah, I think seriously there is some sort of eugenics tie-in. There was some weird, historically the square dancing thing ties into some strange, again, neo-Nazi type thing that sounded like a good idea in like the 20s or 30s. And
I didn't think about it as being eugenics. I think of it more as being when they were organizing this country, everybody was a farmer, I guess.
Right. Yeah, it's just kind of weird, but, we inherit stuff like that. I'm first generation American, so all of these things my parents had no frame of reference for. My father was a refugee from Romania to Israel to America, and he just didn't get anything about like why we do anything that we do. Much in the same way, I didn't know what college was for when I was applying for college. I literally, 2 parents, no college. I had no relatives or family here, so just didn't get why you go and what you do. Animal House was my only frame of reference for that, and really not where things go back in the 80s into the 90s. But
well, that's kind of amazing that you were first generation. That was a recent refugee, kind of somewhat recent.
Yeah, well, Dad was a refugee getting to Palestine, then Israel in 48, and then he and my mom came over in the mid 60s to the U.S. And it was just, I didn't realize how weird that was, much like living in the house I grew up in, until you start comparing it to other people as you get a little older, and you realize it's strange.
Well, everybody's got, or I certainly have immigrants in my past, but I think I actually 4th generation. Now that I think about it, my grandparents came over, so the grandparents are. And actually, no, I have both of my grandmothers were born in the United States. Their parents came over, so it was the great-grandparents.
Yeah. And that's the way it is for a lot of Jews. But, for this particular weirdo in New Jersey, this is how it fell out. And I realized, it's a little strange. But, I do my best.
I would think.
I use protective coloration, so nobody really figures out where I'm from or what I sound like.
Yeah, you made your voice is very, very Midwestern, no accent.
Yeah. No, that's affected completely. Yeah. I also have a gray on gray Toronto Blue Jays cap that I carry with me just in case I need to blend in somewhere. Yeah. Because nobody really hates the Blue Jays. Nobody thinks of what it means to have that. And trust me, this comes from having Holocaust derived, background, I guess.
Wow.
You just want to sort of blend in and sneak by. But
the man I live with has been in rock and roll for most of his life. He's a musician, and he has an outfit he wears to Costco that is a very specially disguised Costcoian outfit. It's a hat and a jacket and stuff that doesn't look like, usually he looks like he's on tour with the Beatles.
It's like seeing Bowie in cargo shorts. There's one shot of him walking around New York in like cargo shorts, a t-shirt and a cap, and you realize, you sort of need a disguise when you're David Bowie to just be able to walk freely.
Yeah.
Whereas in LA, at least everything is driving. But
now it really is.
I was going to ask. The last time we talked was 2015. Non-Trump related issues. How's it been? It's been 5 years. There've been fires, plagues. How are you doing as far as
that? I was trying to move to the Pacific Northwest, and I failed. I spent last summer there. No, not last summer. Last summer was pandemic summer. I spent it doing nothing and wondering where I was. But the year before that, I spent 4 months. I did a house swap with a friend of mine who's a director. He stayed here, and I decided I wanted to move to upstate Washington. So I started putting those pieces in order, and then every single thing got in the way, like fires and plagues and floods and pandemics, like you say. And so I still haven't achieved that yet, but I sort of have that in mind. I'd kind of want to try it. I'm really sick of where I live. I'm tired of everything about it, including the ongoing, we're right on the cusp of fire season. And a year before last, we had to evacuate for 6 weeks. So that was disturbing enough that I still have PTSD from it. And I don't really want to go through that again. So that's how it's been. As far as working goes, you know, when you're a writer, you can write anywhere, but there's sort of, I was always a lot of friends of mine who are writers. I was very sort of often being accused of being a hermit, etc. So I used to being by myself, but this went past the statute of limitations. Kind of, you need to engage on some level to have things to write about. You can't entirely be you on the internet and be inspired to keep creating. And that's the only thing that makes my life worthwhile. I mean, I look forward to having a creative project every single day when I wake up. So it's harder to complete isolation has made it even more challenging, like it has for everybody. Everybody's got some version of this. It's probably easier for me than it is for my nephew, who's used to working at Merrill Lynch and going in and having that excitement all the time. So,
yeah. How long? Basically, I went over 3 months without setting foot in a building other than my house when this stuff really got heavy here in New Jersey. You know, how isolated is isolated? Are you able to get out somewhat? Do you see people?
I was going to the store once a week. You know, I was always doing that. No, I'm not. I occasionally see somebody. I have a friend who comes out here who takes a lot of tests. And sometimes in terms of COVID tests.
I was hoping, as opposed to like exams or you know, school stuff. But go on, yeah.
She gets a lot of COVID tests, and a lot of times right after she's had one, she comes out for a visit. So I'm always okay with that. I have maybe 2 friends, and then I have a couple that I see socially distant, where we sit a few blocks apart from each other, and that always seems kind of stupid. But that's the amount that I've seen people, maybe 3 or 4 times in the whole period. And then I live with Andy, so I'm not totally isolated, but, and I lately I'm getting groceries, the thing where you do Instacart, where you order them and then you go pick it up, except for that screws up all the time. Like yesterday, I got somebody's order wrong and I got the wrong stuff. I didn't realize till I got home that I didn't have my order. That's kind of annoying. You know, I mean, I would guess that's the least of it. I haven't gotten sick yet. I don't want to, as Andy says, boast while the gods are listening, but
yeah, no, we did the 3 bunches of bananas and they just put 3 bananas in. So yeah. I'm used to being...
Oh, well, that's certainly the least of anything you could really complain about is the number of bananas.
Yeah, but we know complaining is what separates us from the animals. So that's still important that we're able to complain. But yeah,
that might be true.
Yeah. In line with the diary and with revisiting your much younger self, this is something that came up when I was talking to a guest last week. Do you physically cringe over things you said or did like 50 years ago? Do things still just strike you while you're you know, walking outside and I can't believe I did that, you know?
Occasionally. I'm not so bad at the self-recriminations as other people I know. You know, I've been for some reason or other, I got super aware pretty early on and started monitoring myself and holding myself to the task of at least be kind and at least be honest and be aware. And so I'm kind of clean with a lot of it. There's a few things before I was that cognizant where I think, oh, geez. But even so, I forgive myself that stuff because I wasn't aware. I didn't really ever do anything that terrible.
Not even terrible, just dumb. Just the occasional embarrassing thing you said, and it still haunts you decades later. Maybe you have no shame, and I do. Maybe that's.
I have plenty of shame, but you know what? I've been listening ever since I became a writer. I've been listening to myself like I'm on tape. So, and especially since I used to do a lot of video pieces and a lot of editing, I sort of hear myself in sound bites sometimes. So I try not to, in the recent past, I try not to offer myself opportunities to cringe. If I'm going back to what's in my diaries, I mean, I'm pretty embarrassed that I was in love with a Nazi.
Keep harping on that.
Well, there's other versions of that. I mean, I was pretty embarrassing before 14, where I was in love with all these different people who didn't even know I was alive and stuff. And I'm just putting my heart out there in these diaries about how much in love, people I've never had even conversations with or anything. But that seems like such a different form of me. And also, I don't know if you've ever seen the show Pen 15. Have you?
No, I heard about it, and I added it to my watch list last night between, I think it was your recommendation and finishing the book, and somebody else had recommended it on Twitter. So yeah, that's something I got to dive into.
Well, I was taken, just to sum up for anybody who's listening to this who doesn't know what that is. It's a remarkable show. It's two women who I think were friends since they were in junior high or middle school or whatever. And they're in their 30s now. I'd say they're 34 maybe. And they're both playing 13-year-olds. They both have braces and stuff. And they're in, the rest of the cast is 13 or 14, and they're playing themselves at 13, 14. And they're unbelievable. It's a weird magic trick. But, and it's beautifully written, and I love the show. And there's some overlap with that in my book. But apart from that, the thing that is really struck me is that the overlap, their junior high years were the 90s, because the only indicator that I have, I'm not picking up the stylistic differences so much as I'm picking up the phone. They have sort of big portable phones with an antenna sticking up. So that's how they're letting you know it isn't right now. But it's otherwise exactly the same idiot girl behavior that I'm writing about in the 60s, and it's kind of amazing to me that it manages to move forward sort of clueless and peculiar and sad that way. It's kind of amazing.
Are women allowed to be funnier? Now, I say this because, as I mentioned to you, I'm running a little promo with Emily Flake right before this conversation about her residency for women writing humor. You feel women can be funnier, or are allowed to
There's always been
have
funny
shows
women.
like this?
There's always been funny women, but there's a ton now. I mean, women have a lot more outlets for it now, and I don't think there's any block against women being funny now, where there might have been at some point when I first started doing stand-up. It was there all the women that I was aware of who preceded myself and Elaine Boosler, who was my best friend at the time when I was starting out, and she was sort of the model of the most modern one. Everyone else was that kind of Phyllis Diller and Joan Rivers kind of model, God, I'm forgetting the name of the woman who wore a price tag on her hat. Fanny something, or anyway. Yeah. It was the whole style was about being self-deprecating, and like, I'm so unattractive that, can you imagine, I make everyone vomit. That was the joke. And my husband hates me because I look like crap, and I'm frigid. There was so much of that. There's none of that now. Everybody's letting you know about a lot of different versions of the way it is, just as they would with guys. It's a way more egalitarian field. There's still a lot of problem with women moving to the next level. Sure. That's much easier for guys, but there's a lot of women out there who are really, really funny in all venues, writing and stand up and producing and everything. I mean, I'm aware of a ton of them.
When it came to putting We Saw Scenery together, it'll sound weird, but was there a challenge in terms of sort of organizing it? You mentioned the randomness of it at one point.
Yeah, it was a huge challenge. It took me a long time. It took me a couple of years to figure out how to make it into a book that wasn't just me going, and then I did this, and then I did that, and then I did this. I didn't want, it's like there was a Bugs Bunny cartoon that I watched when I was a kid where Bugs Bunny is all the members of a baseball team. And they do you know that one? And they read off who's coming. First base, Bugs Bunny. Second base, Bugs Bunny. Third base. Yeah. I didn't want the book to be that. So I played with a lot of versions of it. There was one version of it, the earliest version of it was just going to be an 11-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old in continuity telling you what happened. And then I just thought, well, this doesn't read the way I wanted to. And that's when I started adding the voiceover of me a contemporary me kind of as your tour guide and adding another perspective. And then after I did that, I thought, well, I can also add a perspective with talk balloons. And I started adding those. And then it was the balance of all of that was real tricky. It took me a couple of years to figure out how to get it right.
Because
I
you
couldn't
also
figure it out for a while.
You keep general chronology, but it's also thematic. You do break it out into themes that are, the entries are, generally flowing chronologically, but there is some discontinuity because it fits, the theme of that particular chapter. And that's sort of wondering
exactly. Well,
what
I did is because I'm a completist, I wrote out everything on pads, and then I just started organizing it like what things go together. It was a big jigsaw puzzle. I think I was driving my art director insane. I thought I would do it in a grid when I started, and I wasn't sure how you did it in a grid. And then it was explained to me by him that the fact that I'd put 3 layers of writing in it, the contemporary voice, the diary page, and then the talk balloon, was too much to put into a grid. You'd never be able to read it. It would be way too small, the writing. So it ended up being the way he designed it, which was not at all how I saw it. I thought I was going to have it. I thought I was doing just a normal graphic novel that would be in a grid. And I still don't exactly know how you do that. I was making one JPEG after another, and I thought, okay, if they're all the same size, you can just shove them into a grid. And it turned out that was not what you do. I'm still not exactly sure how you do it in a grid. I'm going to find out before I do anything else. That's for sure.
Well, I did hit up Mimi Pond right before we got together just to let her know I was going to record with you. She didn't have any questions or anything to send, but she let me know how she was doing. I figure she could be a good resource for you in terms of that technical side of, how you're right and laid out.
Well, here's what she contributed. She really wanted me not to use, I'm using a font that is my handwriting.
Yeah.
And she really wanted me to use just plain handwriting. She thought it was a much better personal touch. And I now, since she said that, am doing things with handwriting. But at the time, I felt like it would be too messy. So I didn't do that. But I went to see her studio to see how she was cranking out her graphic novels. And she was sitting in a small room with a giant pile of rectangular pieces of paper that she has a big paper cutter like they had in grade school, a big green one with a grid on it. And she was cutting all pieces of paper the same size, and then they were in a stack. So that's where I got the idea, well, okay, if I do this with a JPEG and I make them all the same size, then you can just shove them in a grid. But she obviously was doing something beyond that because I couldn't. Mine wasn't working and hers did, but she doesn't even know how to do digital stuff. She hasn't gone that route yet. She does it all in pieces of paper that she cuts on a paper cutter.
Yeah.
So that didn't give me any real clues. I knew I wasn't going to do that.
Well, I figure she's at least got the density of words to panel. There are things like that are, like, cartoonists know from practice.
Yeah. I read a lot of those books, but somehow that part didn't get into. I thought I wasn't doing anything way different than what they were doing until I talked to the designer, and I just said to him, "I need you to help me tell me how these are in a grid." And then he started, and then we ended up with what we got. So,
well, like I said, Roz Chast read a lot of books with chapters in them, but it didn't occur to her until she was inside her own book that's how they break out. So, yeah, there are things that once you're the practitioner, you realize why certain books or pieces of art are done the way they're done.
Well, boy, the graphic novel is really putting together a jigsaw puzzle. My goodness, it's a lot of more work although way more fun. I mean, I don't know if you know that right brain, left brain stuff, but the drawings are all on the right brain and the writing is on the left brain. And boy, the right brain is the place to go have a good time. So, and the left brain is not. So anyway, that's. I think I was driving my art director crazy. In fact, he wrote to me recently and said, "Hey, it exists. It's a real thing." And I said, "I'm afraid to look at it. I'm afraid I'm going to see the open a page and go, no, not that one. No, it was the other one we were supposed to." And he said, "I'm afraid to look too." There was so many little pieces that we
Yeah.
put together. It was really just a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah. Are you looking forward to working in that form again? Are you, which is a way of saying, what's your next project? But,
I don't know what my next project is exactly. But I did a bunch of cartoons that I've been collecting since the pandemic. I've just been doing 4 and 6 panel cartoons, and yeah, so I do like doing it, and I am taking Mimi's advice now and just actually using handwriting inside the balloons and not my font. But so I got that far.
Yeah.
I guess I'm going to have to sit down and figure out how if I ever do this again, I'm going to sit down to figure out how Daniel Klaus gets all that stuff into a grid. Because I look at the work that he does and just think, oh my God, how did he? I see pictures of him with a drawing board. When I used to be a painter, I used to paint with a brush with one hair.
Yeah.
And I used to have a drawing board. I was painting watercolors, but really sort of realistic watercolors. And I would sit there with this taped down piece of Arches watercolor paper and paint on the thing. But if I were trying to do that with a grid, I would think my sleeve would be blurring and messing up the drawings I already did. So or you'd have just this little tiny space to draw in. Whereas if you're doing digital, my God, how great is it that you can, the way that you do with your cell phone, you can take an eye and make it the whole size of the iPad. Right. Or a fingernail. And it's this miracle of other way to draw. It's the greatest thing. So I don't really want to go
super
back.
obsessive. You can go way too deep into detail if you do it that way, though. So yeah, there's those balances, I guess, of,
Yeah, but it's so great. Like if you think, okay, this button looks messed up, and then you just take the button and make it the size of the screen and you fix it. And then you put it back to where it was button size and it looks great. So it's hard to go back after that.
Now, let me ask, you're auctioning some of your late night stuff.
I just sold one.
I
sold
saw
the
it.
first thing.
But your size, I'm way too big for your size, and I don't think my wife would have dug the late night jacket. So
I have a lot more. I have 7 more, and they're mostly big. So you can try for one of the other ones.
Keep an eye out then. What prompted that? And did that PTSD experience you talked about, that evacuation, make you reevaluate your stuff and what you have and everything?
Well, and the fact that I've been thinking about moving, I really don't want to, how long do you hold on to just stuff? I mean, I don't
ask my mom, it's until the day you die. But, other people, your mileage may vary. So.
Yeah, my mileage is starting to vary. I always, and also I wasn't taking especially good care of these things. They're just shoved in a closet and taking up a lot of closet space. Those jackets are big. Mm-hmm. So, and I have a lot of football jerseys and baseball jerseys and then artwork from the show. And I didn't have it on display anywhere or anything. I just had them in the closet. And I thought, well, I'd really love to contribute to charity in a bigger way than I do. So if I can get any money for this, it would be fun to write bigger checks to charities I like. And B, if somebody would get a kick out of having this stuff and cherish it, that would be way better than what I'm doing with it. So that's what I started doing. I mean, I look forward to the closet space that the jackets are taking up. They are big and they are taking up a giant closet, and I don't have that kind of space to give up. So I was excited to actually think of this, and I was happy that it made some money. I'm looking forward. I'm going to do more. I'm not going to sell another jacket right away because I don't want to go to the one well too soon. But I think I'm going to sell some weird artwork from the morning show next. I have things that were left out from sketches that I kept as a souvenir, and I'm not looking at them really. And somebody might get a kick out of having them. So then I could give money to charity. I mean, win-win seems like to me.
So no Merrill Markoe museum, I'm guessing.
That is the Merrill Markoe Museum, and I'm selling. I have so much stuff. I mean, and then I live with Andy Preboy, this musician, and he came to the relationship, which is 20 years old now, by the way, with so much stuff. Right. He also saves and saves and saves stuff. We have so much stuff. So anything to weed that stuff down, in my opinion, it's, yeah, I have just too much stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm happy to give this stuff that has any value to contribute to a charity. At this point, it just seems like a great idea. And passing something along to someone who will think it's wonderful, I mean, that just seems like a great idea to me at this point.
And we may as well do a plug. Favorite charity you like donating to?
Oh, I figure other people are giving to other charities. I try to go with the animal charities because I'm extremely passionate about animal rescue and I feel very connected to that world. So this one, the jacket just went to the Sheldrick Wildlife Rescue in Nairobi, Africa, where they're raising orphan baby elephants and rhinos. I was before I sold the jacket, and I'm sending that check to them. I was personally sponsoring. I have 12 baby elephants and 2 rhinos. Wow. And they send me video of how my children are doing. I love them, and I know they're you got to really vet a charity. You got to make sure it's not just going to people who work at the charity. But I have a friend who's a massive elephant rescuer person and knows everything, and she's actually been there and says it's a really great place. So that one I really like. And then my friend Elaine Boosler has this thing called Tales of Joy that I would happily contribute to next, maybe, because she's a clearinghouse she takes donations and then she gives it to smaller charities than her who need money to give a dog surgery or rescue an animal that's being mistreated or whatever. So, there are a bunch of little things like that. I try to stay with the smaller charities where I can see that somebody's really, really, doing something with the money. I don't want it to get lost in the bureaucracy or what I really hate, like in charities when they start sending me cups and calendars and shirts and stuff. I just think save the money and give it to the thing I wanted. I don't want your cups. Yeah. So, and of course now it's getting harder to give to charities until November 3rd because you end up having to support the Senate races of all states. Never before have I ever sent money to Arkansas for the congressional candidate. Jeez, that's become a burden. And then once you give it once, then the next day you get 3 more from the same congressional candidate from Arkansas or Georgia or wherever. So I'll be happy when that sort of subsides.
Yeah, I discovered they weren't accepting my contributions because I'm a registered lobbyist, day job stuff.
Oh,
yeah, I know.
That's interesting.
It's a weird thing, but I was giving a chunk of money to Biden's campaign, and then they hit back. Are you the same Gil Roth who's registered as? I was like, yeah,
that's right.
We can't accept your money. Yeah, and so they send everything back. I'm like,
and that's a hothead. The pharmaceuticals. You've got to watch out for lobbyists from that.
The thing, and I appreciated everything they were saying. I'm like, no, I understand. I wouldn't accept my money either, frankly. So, I
what about your wife? She can probably do it, right?
Yeah, she can. Technically, it's a finance violation if I give her money to donate. But she's been doing work for the campaigns, doing text banking and things like that. So, we do our part. But there's just a degree of the moment you do that, all of the texts and emails that start coming back to you with, we just need to raise this much more. So,
geez. Well, how about the Greyhounds? Are you doing stuff with them still?
Yep. And I've got Bendico, our goofy old Greyhound here. We support the Greyhound Friends of New Jersey. That's the guys we adopted Benny from. And my wife also works at a local animal shelter, and her favorite pit bull just got adopted today. So she's happy. She's happy because, he's a great dog, but also she's happy because he weighs almost 100 pounds and is so much stronger than her that it was really tough walking him. So as much as she loved him, when she went to the shelter, she's happy that he, has a home now and won't be dragging her around.
She's doing it even during the pandemic?
Yeah, she goes once a week to volunteer and masks up and tries to get everybody else there to mask up and, take care of the animals.
Because I was working at a wildlife rescue for the last 3 years here in my area, which I just completely loved. But I didn't do it this year because it's a smallish room. And are you still there? Oh,
yeah,
it's a smallish room and it's full of college volunteers. And I thought, okay, that's dangerous.
Yeah, here the shifts are smaller, and they try, and she goes outdoors a lot with them, and tries to make sure they're outside with the dogs and keeps from getting too much exposure to people. But yeah, it's a weird trip. I mean, this is something I've talked about with a lot of the guests in the last couple of months, contrasting our behavior during the pandemic with our behavior. Well, I was a little too young for it during the 80s when AIDS really broke through, and that sense of treating every other person like they were a potential disease vector. It's real weird.
I didn't have that in the 80s, but I was at the orphan baby care ward of this wildlife rescue, and it was my favorite thing to do. I just looked forward to it, and I couldn't wait to do another season. And then I didn't get to do this season. And it's the one thing, the biggest inconvenience to me of the pandemic is I lost my volunteer status for a while. I'm really looking forward to going back there because it was baby birds and baby squirrels and baby possums mostly, but they were all in incubators and stuff like that, and inside of a warm room, and that just looked like me and college students in a warm room. That doesn't sound right.
So, last question: is there anything since you finished We Saw Scenery? Is there any last thing you would tell young Merrill?
I would tell her to knock off cringing. And I did do that. I would tell her to knock off all the self-criticism stuff. I mean, that stuff really, looking back, is worthless. Especially, and all the, it's a thing that all women do, that you're so ugly, you're so this, I mean, it's worthless. It's not only worthless, but depending on what age you are, it's wrong. I look back on when I thought I looked horrible when I was in my early 20s, and I looked great. It never ends. You should really just knock it off. That's what I would tell myself and every woman. Just knock it off.
It's good words to leave off on. Merrill, thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me.
And that was Merrill Markoe. Her new book is We Saw Scenery from Algonquin Books of Chapel Hill. I loved it. I think you'll enjoy the heck out of it. There's laughs, there's cringes, there's a crush on an anti-Semitic kid, there's the seed of the person who will grow up to be one of the most influential comedy writers of our time. Plus, there's all that wonderful art she did for this. So go read We Saw Scenery, the early diaries of Merrill Markoe. You can follow Merrill on Twitter at Merrill Markoe and Instagram at Merrill_Markoe, and on her site, where she still keeps a blog, at merrillmarkoe.com. There'll be links to all of these in the show notes, but you spell it like this: MERRILLMARKOE. And while you're on those various feeds, keep an eye out for her auctions of her old gear from her Late Night with David Letterman days. Also, make sure you visit Emily Flake's Kickstarter for St. Nell's Humor Writing Residency for Ladies and help get that one over the top before October 30th, 2020. Now, in the before time, this is when I would mention my Patreon and PayPal and how you can help support the show and blah, blah, blah. I don't want your financial help. I'm doing just fine for myself. I do appreciate emails, postcards, letters, etc. to tell me what you like and don't like about the show. But if you can spare anything right now, there are many worthy causes that can use your support. There are individuals with Kickstarters, Patreons, Indiegogos, GoFundMes. There are institutions like food banks and freedom funds. You can make election contributions, even though we're about 2 weeks away from the election and a lot of the money's already been committed, but whatever. This is a world that can use your help right now. So if you're in a position to help make things a little better, then please help. Now, last word, as far as my own art and writing goes, I don't draw or do colored pencils or anything like that. I use words a lot. The first issue of my zine, Haiku for Business Travelers, still has about 35 copies left from the original print run of 300. It's free. If you're interested in it, just drop me a line and send me your address and I'll mail you a copy. Or you can visit haikuforbusinesstravelers.com and fill out the form there. Nobody ever fills out the form, just bots, and those are hysterical. Maybe I'll use those in a subsequent issue of the zine. Anyway, it is free, like I say. If you want to kick in a couple of bucks for postage and production, you can, but this is just about me sharing my art, such as it is. So drop me a line and you will get poetry, essay/stories, podcast excerpts, and some really neat photography. Again, it's Haiku for Business Travelers. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.